Comenzó aquí un gran congreso internacional de conciencia, de estudios sobre la conciencia, que terminó ayer con tremendos invitados, algunos de los cuales pudimos aprovechar para que aparte dieran una charla para todo público, como la que vamos a tener enseguida. Y ese Congreso Internacional de Conciencia lo organizó Tristan Beckenstein, que es un científico argentino que hace muchos años está en Cambridge, pero la verdad que fue maravilloso que pudiéramos tener un evento de esta naturaleza acá en el C3, acá en Argentina. Y hoy es justamente una de esas charlas que aprovechamos del Congreso, de una persona muy conocida, es un caso tenerlo acá, como varios otros invitados, pero la verdad que a nivel tanto personal como institucional, tenerlo a Dan Dennett aquí es un sueño. Dan es filósofo de Harvard, después se doctoró en Oxford, y es uno de los filósofos más importantes en el área de la neurociencia y la conciencia. Tiene un montón de libros, afortunadamente muchos de esos libros están traducidos. Uno de sus más conocidos libros sobre este tema es La conciencia explicada, un libro de 1991, ¿sí? Cuando nadie todavía estaba hablando de una neurociencia de la conciencia, o muy poquitos lo estaban haciendo. Dan se puso a pensar desde la filosofía qué se podía decir sobre la conciencia. Otros de sus libros tienen que ver con la evolución, como La idea peligrosa de Darwin, tienen que ver con la religión como una ilusión, que también está traducido. Su libro más reciente tiene que ver con instrucciones de uso para pensar, que ese todavía no está traducido, pero vamos a trabajar al respecto. Y acá podríamos hacer varios experimentos, lo que le gustan a los filósofos, los experimentos de pensamiento, ¿no? Uno de los posibles experimentos sería, si yo les pidiera que cerraran los ojos e imaginaran un filósofo. Y ahora abrían los ojos y miren ahí. Y su presencia no fue desapercibida en absoluto. Hace unos días, cuando estaba en el Congreso, estaban muy preocupadas las personas de seguridad de acá del centro, pues vieron que todavía no está habilitada la plaza de aquí al lado y nos dijeron: hay un señor que me parece que es Papá Noel, con un bastón enorme, y estaban muy preocupados al respecto, dijimos que no se preocuparan. La charla de hoy junta dos de las pasiones de Dan Dennett, la conciencia, por supuesto, y la magia, que es una de las herramientas para llegar a la conciencia. Él es amigo de la mayoría de los magos más grosos del mundo, ¿sí? De los que ustedes han visto en documentales, es amigo personal y charlan sobre estos temas de conciencia. Entonces nos propuso que su charla tuviera eso, una mirada mágica, una mirada de un mago sobre la conciencia. Tiene muchos otros intereses Dan, pero nos pareció que la verdad que aprovecharlo con esta charla era un honor del cual no nos queríamos privar. No, como habrán visto, no tenemos traducción simultánea, la charla es en inglés, pero entre Tris y yo traduciremos algunas cosas necesarias, no todo, porque si no vamos a cortar el hilo. Vamos a soltar el hilo de la conciencia de la charla de Dan, pero la mayoría de las cosas que sean necesarias las vamos a traducir, y hacia el final haremos algunas preguntas que también podemos traducir. Así que muchas gracias por venir. Dan, it's an honor having you here, and the hall is yours.
With apologies, I think I'm going to sit down because I'll have to pause a lot so that they can translate for me. And I've spent a lot of hours walking in Recoleta today. I think it would be better for me to sit down. I think you can all see me okay? So, I am delighted to be here. It's been an honor to be treated so wonderfully at the conference and in this city, which I am returning to after 26 years since my last visit. So let me get started. A magician's view of consciousness. Let's see if
Solo para parar, que estuvo en Argentina hace 26 años, está muy contento de estar aquí de nuevo y que esta mañana estuvo paseando por Recoleta.
And this is a favorite book of mine by a magician philosopher named Lee Siegel about the Indian street magic. on which he is an expert. I highly recommend it. But in the book, he has a wonderful coda where he says the following: I'm writing a book on magic, I explain, and I'm asked, real magic? By real magic, people mean miracles, thaumaturgical acts, supernatural powers. No, I answer, conjuring tricks, not real magic.
Empieza citando un libro de Lee Siegel sobre que es un filósofo y mago sobre la ciencia en la calle en India, y ese libro comienza con esta coda que es: estoy escribiendo un libro sobre magia, explico, y me preguntan, ¿magia de verdad? Por magia de verdad la gente habla de milagros, actos taumaturginos y poderes supernaturales. No, contesto, hacer trucos, no magia de verdad.
And he goes on, real magic, in other words, refers to the magic that's not real, while the magic that is real, that can actually be done, is not real magic.
La magia real, en otras palabras, se refiere a la magia que no es real, mientras que la magia que es real, la que puede ser realmente hecha, no es magia real.
This quotation has become a sort of mantra for me in my whole career, because the two main topics that I work on, consciousness and free will, in both cases there are many people who say, well, if you don't think free will is real magic, then you don't believe in free will. And they say the same thing about consciousness.
Esta cita se ha convertido en un mantra para mí porque tiene que ver con los dos temas que más me interesan, que son la conciencia y el libre albedrío, porque me dicen que si no crees en el libre albedrío, entonces no crees en la magia real, porque son lo mismo.
For instance, here's Robert Wright writing a few years ago. Of course, the problem here is with the claim that consciousness is identical to physical brain states. The more Dennett and others try to explain to me what they mean by this, the more convinced I become that what they really mean is that consciousness doesn't exist.
Esta es una cita de Robert Wright que se llama La conciencia como la magia real. Por supuesto, el problema aquí es el decir que la conciencia es idéntica a estados físicos del cerebro. A medida que Dennett y otros tratan de explicarme qué es lo que quieren decir por esto, lo más convencido estoy de que lo que realmente dicen es que la conciencia no existe.
So my question is, could consciousness be more like stage magic than like real magic? I'm going to be talking about consciousness as a bag of tricks, and I'm going to consider how we explain stage magic.
Entonces, ¿podría ser que la conciencia sea más como la magia de escenario que la magia real? En tal caso, la conciencia sería un conjunto de trucos.
So let's talk about sawing the lady in half. How was it done? I'm going to tell you. He doesn't saw her in half. He just makes it appear as if he does.
Va a hablar de cómo se corta una señora a la mitad. ¿Cómo se hace? Les voy a decir, no la corta en la mitad, solamente hace que parezca que lo hace.
How does he do that? Not my department. I'm a philosopher.
Y cómo lo hace, no es asunto mío, yo soy un filósofo.
That's what philosophers often do. What they say is true, but it doesn't go far enough. Ask a magician. But a professional magician won't tell. Well, I'm a professional philosopher and an amateur magician.
Eso es lo que los filósofos suelen hacer. No llegan muy lejos y le dicen, preguntarle a un mago, pero los magos no contestan. Yo soy un filósofo profesional, pero también soy un mago amateur.
I could tell you how to saw a lady in half, but I won't.
Les podría decir cómo se corta una señorita al medio, pero no les voy a decir.
I will tell you how consciousness happens in the brain.
Les voy a decir cómo ocurre la conciencia en el cerebro.
I need a lot of help one of the best scientists in the world on this topic is Jean-Pierre Changeux in Paris, who has been working for years with Stanislas Dehaene, who's been here this week at the meeting. Stan and Jean-Pierre are old friends of mine. I work with them sometimes. And a few years ago in Europe, Changeux gave a talk with a very fancy title toward a molecular biology of conscious processing. I'll let you do that.
Un gran neurofisiólogo francés, Jean-Pierre Changeux, que trabaja con Stanislas Dehaene, que estuvo aquí esta semana, los dos amigos y colegas de Dan, dio una conferencia en este simposio hace unos años y el título de la conferencia es hacia hacia una biología molecular del procesamiento consciente, cómo las funciones superiores del cerebro emergen de los mecanismos de transmisión de señales.
Now this is one of his main slides, and you will be grateful I'm not going to take you through it. It's quite complicated, it has many parts, and it's not going to be on the examination.
Esta es una de las figuras de Changeux de esa charla y tienen suerte de que no les voy a contar de qué se trata, es muy compleja, tiene muchas partes y no entra para el parcial.
But let me just say that I endorse the details of this theory, the global neuronal workspace theory, and contribute to it as best I can. So I am saying if you really want to know the details, this is where to look.
Sin embargo, sí les puedo decir que estoy de acuerdo con lo que está detrás de esta figura, que es una teoría llamada el espacio global neuronal, y si quieren saber más sobre estos temas, busquen esto, Global Neuronal Workspace, porque es ahí donde está la parte dura de lo que él va a contar.
But I'm concentrating on one phrase on that slide, and when Jean-Pierre put it up on the projector, I wrote it down, and then afterwards in the discussion, I drew attention to it. And this was the sentence. I'll just go back so you can see it. There, where the arrow is, right here. Yielding subjective experience of being conscious and reportability. And this was a sort of an awkward phrase, and I asked him if he could expand on it a little bit and say a bit more about just what he meant by speaking of this process yielding subjective experience of being conscious.
Hay una frase en esa diapositiva que a él le llamó la atención, la anotó y esperó a que terminara la charla para hacerle una pregunta a Changeux, y la frase es la palabra yield, que es dar, otorgar, que es una palabra importante de lo que sigue en la charla, otorgando la experiencia subjetiva de estar consciente y reportabilidad, o sea, poder contar que uno está consciente.
And Changeux's answer to me was the perfect answer to give to a philosopher like me. He said, "What do you think I should say?"
La respuesta de Changeux es perfecta para un filósofo como él, que es, ¿qué pensás que debiera decir?
And that's what I'm going to try to tell you. And it's taken me 3 years to figure it out. This is a job for a philosopher. This is my favorite picture of consciousness. It is a cover of a New Yorker magazine done by the late, great Saul Steinberg many years ago. And if you look at it, you will see that in the art museum, this rather Pointillist gentleman is identifying the painter as Braque. That reminds him of the word Baroque. Baroque, bark, poodle, and he's off in a stream of consciousness, which is quite fascinating.
Esto es una tapa de la revista New Yorker de hace unos años, hecha por Saul Steiner, que hay una persona frente a un cuadro que identifica como Braque, y dentro de ese globo está ¿A qué lo lleva Braque? Braque, barroco, etcétera, etcétera, es lo que se conoce como la vía, el arroyo de la conciencia, como lo definió William James.
It's a very vivid rendition of this man's stream of consciousness. And it isn't just words, there's colors and shapes. And if it weren't that it was the cover of a magazine, he might have put in some melody and other modes of consciousness. But I think it's a very evocative picture. If you follow along on this, you get you learn quite a lot about this man. In fact, if I leave this up too long as a slide, I find people don't listen to me. They're busy studying the picture to see what's going on in the man's head.
Es una excelente imagen del flujo de la conciencia, aunque dejó afuera obviamente otras cuestiones como el sonido u otros sentidos, pero que es tan buena que lo que le suele pasar es que si deja la imagen demasiado tiempo, la gente deja de escucharlo y se concentra en el flujo de conciencia del personaje.
There's a philosopher named David Chalmers who, a few years back, identified what he called the hard problem. And the question is this really a serious problem? Or is it, as I will argue, an illusion, a cognitive illusion, not a serious problem at all?
Hace unos años un filósofo llamado David Chalmers habló de la conciencia como un problema difícil, un hard problem. Y acá Dan va a argumentar para ver si es realmente un problema difícil o es una ilusión cognitiva.
So let's consider the Steinberg cover as a metaphorical representation of consciousness. Of course it's a metaphor, it's not literal. There's not a little balloon over the man's head, and the other details are not exactly what's going on in his head. That's clear.
La representación, la imagen de esa etapa es obviamente una representación metafórica de la conciencia.
But it seems to be a brilliant metaphorical representation of his consciousness. Or is it a metaphorical representation of the stream of unconsciousness of a highly cultured zombie?
O bien es una representación metafórica del flujo de inconsciencia de un zombie con mucha cultura.
Now, when I talk about a zombie, I don't mean a movie zombie, I mean a philosopher zombie. Movie zombies are much more important and realistic than philosopher zombies.
Los zombies de las películas son mucho más importantes y realistas que los zombies de los filósofos.
Philosopher zombies, by definition, are behaviorally indistinguishable at every level from normal, conscious human beings. It's just that there's nobody home.
La definición de un zombie para un filósofo es que es comportamentalmente indistinguible en cualquier nivel de un ser humano normal y consciente, solo que no hay nadie en casa.
Now, David Chalmers and others have argued that although they don't think that philosopher zombies are real, they think they're possible, and that this is what creates the hard problem.
David Chalmers y otros han argumentado que, aunque no sean reales, los zombies de filósofos pueden ser posibles, pueden ser pensables. Por lo tanto, esto es lo que crea el problema difícil de la conciencia.
Somebody sent me this slide of two duelists, Descartes and David Chalmers.
Dos dualistas, René Descartes y David Chalmers.
But then I countered with this slide two Darwinians, Darwin and me. So now we're going to look at the hard problem. Chalmers would agree that there is no way of representing the difference between a zombie and a conscious person except vacuously with labels.
Chalmers
dice que no hay manera de representar la diferencia entre un zombie filosófico y una persona consciente, excepto con las etiquetas.
Yes, like this. Here's a picture of a conscious man with a conscious stream of consciousness. No, wait a minute, it's a zombie. No, it's conscious. No, it's a zombie. No, it's conscious. There's no difference at any scale. That is by definition.
No hay forma de diferenciarlos excepto con las etiquetas a ningún nivel.
So explaining the difference is very, very, very hard. In fact, it's impossible.
Es imposible explicar las diferencias, no solo es muy difícil, es imposible.
So the task of a proper scientific theory of consciousness is to close the gap between the metaphorical truth about the mind, as shown in Langberg's cover, and the literal truth about the brain.
La tarea de una teoría de la conciencia es cerrar la grieta entre la verdad metafórica sobre la mente y la verdad literal, real sobre el cerebro.
The task does not distinguish between explaining consciousness from explaining zombie unconsciousness. It just ignores the imagined possibility that there is a difference.
La tarea no distingue entre explicar la conciencia real y la conciencia del zombie, la conciencia inconsciente del zombie. No hay una diferencia.
In other words, it assumes by default that consciousness is not real magic.
La asunción es que la conciencia no es magia real.
It sets aside the systematically impossible hard problem and replaces it with what I have called the hard question. And then what happens?
Y reemplaza el problema duro del cual habla Chalmers y los otros, y lo reemplaza con la pregunta difícil.
That's where you answer the question of how to thaw the lady in half by getting down to the details.
Hay que resolverla entendiendo cómo se corta la cebollita en dos, mirando los detalles.
It's hard enough, even if it isn't the hard problem. So, sawing the lady in half. Imagine somebody saying, I just saw it and it must be real magic. I can't believe that I could have been fooled by this. I think he really sawed her in half.
Tiene que ser magia real, no puedo creer que me puedan engañar con esto.
So it must be done by poltergeists, or by telekinesis, or maybe quantum entanglement, or the 17th dimension, or multiple universes. No. Exhaust conservative theories first.
Antes de jugarse a la poltergeist o la telequinesis o cualquier otra cosa, vamos a intentar con un poco de Occam's razor, de teorías conservadoras.
We wouldn't take seriously a person who said about sawing the lady in half, my intuition tells me that this is real magic. We would just say, too bad for your intuition, we're going to explain it as stage magic, and that's what we have to do with consciousness too.
Cuando alguien te diga, mi intuición es que esto es magia real, paremos un momento y pensemos, no creo que sea así.
One of my magician friends is Jamie Ian Swiss, a very fine New York City-based magician. And he once said, no one would ever think that we would ever work this hard to fool you. That's a secret and a method of magic.
Nadie nos creería si decimos que estamos trabajando tan fuerte para engañarte. Ese es el secreto, ese es el método de la magia.
Because if you like to try to figure out how magic tricks work, do not ignore brute force methods. Do not ignore an avenue which involves spending hundreds and hundreds of hours arranging something just so. magicians will do that.
Para poder hacer un truco de magia, imagínense que hay que trabajar de muchísimas maneras y de cosas que parecen imposibles para lograr hacerlo. Los magos, eso es lo que hacen los magos.
Magicians have no shame, and neither do brains.
Los magos no tienen vergüenza y tampoco el cerebro.
Besides, the illusions of consciousness are benign illusions. They are user illusions, like the desktop of your computer.
Las ilusiones de la conciencia son ilusiones benignas, son ilusiones del usuario, como el desktop de tu computadora.
In my 1991 book, I wrote, "The idea of a user illusion of a virtual machine is tantalizingly suggested. If consciousness is a virtual machine, who is the user for whom the illusion works?"
En el 91, Dan en su libro dijo que la idea de una ilusión del usuario, de una máquina virtual, es muy sugerente. Si esa conciencia es de máquina virtual, ¿quién es el usuario para que esa ilusión funcione?
At the same time, a Dutch science journalist, Cor Noordetrenders, was writing a book called The User Illusion, Cutting Consciousness Down to Size, but the English translation of that didn't appear until 1999. So he didn't know about my book and I didn't know about his book, which is why neither one of us mentions the other. I just want people to know that this is one of those cases where we both hit on the same idea at about the same time. So that, if you wondered who was first with the idea of the user illusion, there's no good answer. He was first in print in Danish, and I was first in print in English, and that's all there is to it.
En el mismo año, en el 91, a pesar que se imprimió antes, no se sabe quién de los dos, si este filósofo Tor Noordetrenders o él, se le ocurrió la idea de la ilusión del usuario, pero él está contento de darle la idea si es necesario.
And in fact, my dear recently departed friend Marvin Minsky, the artificial intelligence researcher at MIT, he had pretty much the same idea before either one of us.
Incluso Marvin Minsky, que ya murió, que era un investigador del MIT, tuvo la idea antes.
Now, I think you're all familiar with the user illusion, although perhaps not under those terms. This is a Microsoft Windows user illusion, and this is a Mac user illusion, and
Ustedes ya vieron tanto como en Windows como en Mac, los dos tienen desktop y esa es la ilusión del usuario. Están ustedes siempre usándola.
So, the desktop user illusion, both Windows and Mac, and there are others, has been designed by engineers to be a user-friendly set of metaphors that simplify narcissistically. That is to say, they make it easier for you narcissist. You don't have to worry about details that you can ignore safely thanks to the user.
Los ingenieros tanto de Mac como de Windows diseñaron el desktop para que sea una ilusión para ustedes. Y ustedes usan esa serie de metáforas de los ingenieros narcisísticamente.
The consciousness experience user illusion has been designed by evolution by natural selection to be a user-friendly set of metaphors that also simplify narcissism.
La experiencia consciente, la ilusión del usuario, que es la experiencia consciente, también ha sido diseñada por la evolución, por selección natural, para ser user-friendly, como una serie de metáforas que simplemente que simplifican narcisísticamente lo que sentimos.
The desktop user illusion makes it easy to control the many activities that the computer is capable of helping you with, and the conscious experience user illusion helps you to control Gibsonian affordances.
Tanto la ilusión del escritorio, de la computadora, como la ilusión de la experiencia consciente nos permiten generar, bueno, no sé cómo decir, affordances de Gibbs.
J.J. Gibson,
Propiedades.
Jimmy Gibson was the coiner of the term affordances in his 1979 book. And he started something of a cult in psychology, Gibsonian cult. And there's a lot that's crazy about some of the radical Gibsonian work, but the basic idea is brilliant and is now being rediscovered in many quarters.
Gibson empezó como una revolución en el 79, en realidad un poco antes, y ahora se está redescubriendo.
Gibson's affordances are opportunities. He says it's what the environment offers the animal for good or ill.
Gibson, las propiedades de Gibson son oportunidades, es qué es lo que la naturaleza nos ofrece a los animales para que sea por bien o por mal.
Perceptual motor systems are designed to discern and respond appropriately to affordances.
Los sistemas perceptuales y motores están diseñados para responder directamente a estas propiedades de Gibson.
So how do you respond to an affordance? Well, maybe you run, or maybe you duck down, or maybe you eat, or maybe you hide behind, or maybe you run through a door, or there are many opportunities for animals that they have to deal with, and there's others that they're just as, basically they're invisible to them.
¿Cuáles son las respuestas que tiene un animal en estas propiedades de Gibson? ¿Tendrá que corres o te escondes o comes? Hay muchas oportunidades, muchas propiedades de Gibson que te permiten hacer esto.
In order to control responses appropriately, the brain has to represent the affordance.
Para poder controlar las respuestas de manera correcta, el cerebro tiene que representar estas propiedades.
But it does not need to render the affordance in any new medium of representation.
No hace falta que se implemente estas propiedades en ningún otro lugar.
This is a very important point.
Es un punto muy importante este.
Affordances are not properties of internal renderings. They are properties in the environment that are discerned by the animal.
Estas propiedades no son representaciones internas específicas, son propiedades que están definidas por el entorno.
So they're like being liquid or red or hard or shaped like a fish or something like that. Properties of things in the world that the animal is designed to be able to detect and then do something appropriate about it.
Estas propiedades son ser líquido, ser rojo, ser duro, son propiedades que están definidas por el entorno y no por la representación que se ha formado en el cerebro.
Now, the desktop user illusion is rendered in pixels of color on the screen, but the consciousness user illusion isn't rendered in anything.
Y la representación, la ilusión del usuario en el escritorio es en píxeles de color en la pantalla, pero la ilusión de la conciencia no se representa en nada en particular.
Recall Boulanger phrase, yielding subjective experience of being conscious and recordability, and what I'm saying now is there are neural structures in the global neuronal workspace that can identify affordances, evaluate affordances, manipulate representations of affordances, control reports of all this. In other words, the global neuronal workspace of the Gahan-Changer theory does all the work with the affordances.
Bueno, respondiendo a la pregunta inicial de Jean-Jean, de si la experiencia subjetiva de estar consciente y poder reportar, el cerebro y la estructura que esta teoría del neuronal global te permite decir que está la identidad de estas propiedades están allí, la evaluación de estas propiedades y la manipulación de las representaciones de estas propiedades y el control, y eso es todo lo que hay.
Doesn't that leave something out?
¿No hay algo que no se explica? ¿Hay algo que no está?
Something all important?
¿Algo muy importante?
The generation of qualia of experience?
La generación de los qualia, de las experiencias.
No. Qualia couldn't be important if they didn't have downstream effects. When we've accounted for all the downstream effects, we've accounted for qualia.
Cuando podamos explicar a todos los efectos más abajo de la teoría, vamos a haber explicado todo y no va a haber cuáles.
There's a very popular idea that there must be transduction into some special phenomenal medium in the brain.
Está la idea de que tiene que haber un tipo de transducción de fenomenológica en el medio.
I'm going to explain this by an analogy to digital video. You know, digital video camera takes in photons, acoustic pressure waves in the microphone. Those are transduced into the medium of digital bit streams and bit masses, zeros and ones.
En esta comparación, los fotones y la presión acústica, las ondas de presión acústica son transducidas en un medio que es básicamente bits.
These then can be broadcast, stored, manipulated, and adjusted ad libitum.
Una vez que están en ese formato digital, pueden ser manipuladas de cualquier manera, de la manera que queramos.
Now they may eventually be played back on an LCD screen like a computer or a television, or pushed through a projector like the bit streams up there once they're transduced back into color.
Una vez que esos fotones están transducidos, lo podemos poner en un proyector donde queramos.
That's one thing you can do with a digital recorder, transduce first into bits and then back into color.
Vas desde los fotones a los bits en modo digital y después puedes volver a los fotones.
So now let's have a little thought experiment, a Stone Age failure of imagination. Imagine we take a DVD camera, a player, some DVD discs, and we go up the Amazon and we find some Stone Age tribe, and we show them, we record their activities, and then we take the disc out, we put it in the player, and we show them how we've managed to capture their images and their sounds and play them back on the player.
Imaginen que vamos por ejemplo, a un indio en el Amazonas que no está relacionado con la tecnología y le mostramos un DVD, lo filmamos, le mostramos su filmación. Imagínense qué va a pasar.
Well, they might think it was magic.
Puede ser.
Probably they would think it was just magic.
Van a
I'm
pensar que
going
es
to
magia.
I'm going to give them credit for being more scientific.
Voy a
And I'm
pensar
going
que
to
ellos
suppose that one of them at least said, no, it's not magic. I bet I know what it is. I bet there are tiny, tiny images, little colored images, and tiny, barely audible sounds hanging onto those shiny discs somehow.
La mayoría puede ser que vaya a decir que es magia, pero puede ser que haya alguno que diga, no, yo ya sé cómo funciona esto. Hay pequeñas imágenes chiquitas y apenas sonidos chiquititos que se metieron en esta cosita que me trajiste, el DVD.
I mean, you think about it, you see this silvery disc and you look at it, it's hard to see how there's any pictures, any video, any audio on that thing. And so I'm imagining that this person says, well, they must be not really, they must be below the level of human perception, but they gotta be on there.
Imagínense que miran el DVD y ven que está ahí y sin embargo no se ve ningún tipo de imagen chiquitita ni sonido, pero se ve que no podemos verlo, pero tiene que estar ahí.
But that's just wrong, this is a mistake. No, there are representations of sights and sounds on that disc that are neither colored nor audible.
No hay sonido y color en el DVD, es otro formato, están representados en bits en el DVD.
Now, the representational features in your brain are like DVD representations in one way. They're not iconic like cinema film.
Las representaciones de tu cerebro son como el DVD de una manera, pero no son como en el cine.
After all, you can hold up a piece of film and you can see the colors on each frame. You can see the red and the green, it's right there, but not, of course, on digital.
En las viejas películas de 35 milímetros podías ver las imágenes cuadro por cuadro, pero no en el digital, es distinto.
But the representations in your brain are unlike DVD messages in another way, and that is that their function is not to convey information to a system that then renders them anew, that transduces them back into iconic representations, red and so forth, for the appreciation of the audience in the Cartesian theater.
Esas funciones que uno piensa como el DVD en el cerebro no son así, no funcionan así, no son para traducir la información directamente, punto por punto. No son representaciones para la audiencia que está en el cerebro cartesiano del cerebro.
So I want to tell you about the Cartesian theater. This is my term for an imaginary place in the brain. Descartes said that it was an immaterial res cogitans, a dualistic mystery place. But many, even some very sophisticated neuroscientists, have thrown away the dualism, but they've kept the idea that there's a very special place in the brain where the show happens.
El teatro cartesiano, cuando Descartes lo describió, es que había un lugar muy especial donde adentro del cerebro, dentro de la cabeza, se representaban. Muchos filósofos neurocientíficos se dejaron esa idea, aún así mantienen la idea pequeña de que puede ser que todavía haya algo especial en el cerebro para representar como en un teatro.
Now, my 91 book was directed to the task of demolishing the idea of the Cartesian theater. And people often have asked me, well, now are you making an a priori claim or an empirical claim?
En el libro del 91, su idea central era eliminar la idea del teatro cartesiano en el cerebro. Y sin embargo, después del libro, la gente le preguntaba, ¿esto es un argumento empírico que se puede testear o es un argumento simplemente teórico?
I'm making 2 points. The first one is empirical. If we look inside, we don't find a Cartesian theater.
El primer punto es empírico. Si nos miramos dentro del cerebro, no encontramos un teatro.
But we might. Wait a minute. That's the Cartesian theater. That's the homunculus sitting there watching the screen, listening to the sounds coming in through the loudspeakers.
Ese es el teatro cartesiano, es el homúnculo que está ahí adentro sentado escuchando los sonidos que vienen por los parlantes.
So the empirical point is, when we look inside, we don't find that. This picture is a sort of cartoon of a Cartesian theater. Here you see the film is exposed and developed and then projected onto the screen, and there's actually 2 homunculi in this theater. And we know that this is silly. That's not how consciousness works. That's not how vision works. And what we have to do is to understand how we get rid of that picture. And the answer is that all the work done by the imagined homunculus in the Cartesian theater must be distributed around to various lesser agencies in the brain.
El dibujo anterior era una representación del teatro cartesiano con 2 hombrecitos, 2 homúnculos mirando lo que entraba, pero la forma de destruirlo, la moral de esto es que todo el trabajo que hacen estos hombrecitos imaginados en el teatro cartesiano se debe distribuir con agencias menores distribuidas en todo el cerebro.
Now, transduction, you see, would be going backwards. Would be going back to the Cartesian theater, and then we'd have to have transduction back out.
Hablar de transducción, o sea, transformar una energía en otra, sería volver al concepto del teatro cartesiano, lo cual es lo que queremos evitar.
Instead, what the brain does is it translates or transforms one kind of neural code into another, and another, and another, into codes that make the job of doing all the controlling and affordance recognizing easier for the brain. It is this transformation or recoding that plays the imagined role.
En general, las propiedades cualitativas de los estímulos o los qualia.
All without rendering the new medium. These representations in the medium of spike trains, neural spike trains, are transformed or translated into other formats for ease of responding, but they're not transduced into another medium.
Todo esto sin representar, sin hacer renders. Estas representaciones son todas en el mismo medio de patrones de disparos de neuronas que se transforman o traducen en otras formas para responder más fácilmente, pero no son traducidas en otro tipo, pero transducidas en otro tipo de medio.
Now, the same theater of imagination besets many technologically sophisticated scientists and philosophers. They still think there has to be a second transduction. I'm going to do a little experiment to show you how this goes.
Aún así, muchos científicos y filósofos se engañan por esto y les voy a mostrar un experimento para mostrarles cómo funciona.
Now, please close your eyes. I mean it. Close your eyes.
Cierren los ojos.
Now, imagine as vividly as you can the capital letter A, bright blue, on a black background.
Imaginen lo vívidamente que puedan una letra mayúscula A en azul brillante sobre un fondo negro.
Keep your eyes closed, please.
Mantengan los ojos cerrados.
Now open them.
Ahora abran.
This A, is it about the same shade of blue as the one you imagined, or is it different?
¿Se parece a esta? ¿La que imaginaron o es diferente?
How about this one? A
¿Y
little
esta?
closer? Okay. The point I want to make is you can answer these questions. You can compare the A you see on the screen to the A you remember from your imagination. That's one of the things you can do. And then what happens? There's a little capacity that we have to explain. Now the blue on the screen was rendered in real color. How about the blue in your mind?
Estas preguntas las podemos responder, podemos imaginarnos si la letra era parecida a la nuestra o más oscura, más clara. El azul que se muestra en la pantalla se representa en color real, pero ¿qué pasa con el azul en la mente?
It is represented in your brain, but not rendered in any special medium at all.
Está representado en el cerebro, pero no representado en un medio especial.
Think about it. It doesn't have to be. In fact, it shouldn't be. If you want to have a physically possible comparison between the blue on the screen and the blue in your mind, you have to get them into the same code that is capable of being, in effect, examined and read by some hardware in your brain. For that, you don't need transduction.
No tiene por qué ser representada en un medio especial. Piensen que no necesitamos transducción, dado que la representación tiene que ocurrir en el cerebro. No necesitamos transducirla en otro medio.
If the blue A in your mind had to be rendered, you'd need something functionally like retinal cone cells. Those are the cells on the retina that respond to color to respond to the rendering. Otherwise, you couldn't recognize it, you couldn't appreciate it as a blue A in your mind's eye.
Si la letra azul en la mente fuera representada, necesitaríamos algo funcional como las células de la retina que respondan a esa representación. De lo contrario, no podríamos reconocerla o apreciarla como una letra A azul.
So here's a curious fact. We have no access to the physical properties of the physical representations that do all the information-bearing work in the brain.
Curioso que no tenemos acceso a las propiedades físicas de las representaciones físicas que hacen todo el trabajo de información en el cerebro.
You were able to compare the A you imagined in your mind to an A on the board. You have no idea how you did it. It happened in your brain, and it didn't involve rendering that blue A in your mind in some special phenomenal medium.
Ustedes fueron capaces de comparar la A que estaba en la pantalla con la que imaginaron, pero no tienen idea de cómo lo hicieron. No necesitaron representar ese azul en un medio en particular.
We think that we have access to the properties of our internal representations, but that is an illusion. We have access to the content of our representations, but we have no clue about how that content is represented in neural vehicles.
Creemos tener acceso a las propiedades de nuestras representaciones internas, pero eso es una ilusión. Tenemos acceso al contenido de nuestras representaciones, pero no tenemos idea de cómo ese contenido es representado en las neuronas.
Translation is not transduction. The representations are designed to put the relevant environmental information about affordances in readily accessible readable forms.
Traducir no es transducir. Las representaciones están diseñadas para poner la información ambiental relevante sobre las oportunidades en formas que puedan ser fácilmente accesibles o legibles.
Accessible by whom? Accessible by what? By further structures and processes in the global neuronal workspace.
¿Accesible por quién? ¿Accesible por qué? Por otras estructuras y procesos en la red global neuronal.
Remember, all the work done by the homunculus has to be outsourced to simpler neural agencies spread around in the brain.
Todo el trabajo que hacen estos hombrecitos que supuestamente miran el teatro tienen que después ser enviados a otros lugares que hacen el trabajo en el cerebro.
Okay, here then are three, I think, obvious truths and a hard question. First, there's no second transduction in the brain. The photons, the light, the sound, they're transduced into neural spike trains, and it's spike trains all the way. There's no transduction into any other medium in the brain.
Tres verdades obvias y una pregunta difícil. Primera, no hay una segunda transducción en el cerebro. Hay una primera transducción que está dada por los receptores de la retina que transducen la energía de la luz a códigos neurales, pero después se mantiene siempre en códigos neurales.
And of course, there's no Cartesian theater in the brain.
Por supuesto, no hay teatro cartesiano en el cerebro.
But there seems to be a Cartesian theater.
Pero parece haberlo.
How could this be true?
¿Cómo puede ser?
How does the magic, how does the illusion happen? The tempting mistake is to say there's a double transduction. And I'm saying, no, you just have to abandon that idea. There's no such thing. And some people just hate that idea. And here's an example.
La tentación es pensar que hay dos transducciones, pero yo digo que hay que abandonar esa idea de dos transducciones en el cerebro.
If, in short, there's a community of computers living in my head, there'd also better be somebody who's in charge, and by God, it would better be me.
una frase de Jerry Fodor, un filósofo de la conciencia también. Sí, en resumen, hay una comunidad de computadores viviendo en mi cabeza, también debe haber alguien que está a cargo, y por Dios que prefiero ser yo.
Here's another one. Daniel Dennett is the devil. There is no internal witness, no central recognizer, meaning no self other than an abstract center of narrative gravity, which is itself nothing but a convenient fiction. For Dennett, it is not a case of the emperor having no clothes. It's rather that the clothes have no emperor.
Otra crítica a la idea de Dan es una frase de Borges. Jorge Luis. Daniel Dennett es el demonio. No hay testigos internos, no hay un reconocedor central del significado, y no hay un self, un uno, más que un centro de gravedad narrativa abstracto que en sí no es nada, pero una ficción conveniente. Para Dennett no es un caso de que el emperador no tiene ropas, parafraseando el libro de Penrose, ¿sí? Es más bien que las ropas no tienen emperador.
Exactly.
Eso.
If you still have an emperor in your theory, you don't have a theory of consciousness. You've got a theory of television or something.
Si hay un emperador en tu teoría de conciencia, no tenés una teoría de conciencia, tenés una teoría de la televisión o algo así.
That's the point of what I call the hard question. You have to take that emperor apart and turn that emperor into a lot of less magnificent functionaries that do their work physically without magic.
Hay que olvidarse del emperador, hay que pensar en otras estructuras mucho menos magníficas, pero que hacen el trabajo sin magia.
So if you still have an emperor, as I said, you haven't begun your theory. Meanwhile, David Chalmers, he says, if you don't have the subject in your theory, you're evading the main issue, the hard problem.
Dice Dennett, si todavía tenés un emperador, un sujeto experiencial, no has ni siquiera comenzado tu teoría. Mientras tanto, David Chalmers, el que proponía el problema difícil, dice, si no tenés al sujeto en tu teoría, estás evadiendo el problema principal, que es el problema difícil.
So look, there's no imaginable compromise between Chalmers' position and mine. One of us is dead wrong.
No hay compromiso entre lo que piensa Chalmers y lo que pienso yo. Uno de los dos está completamente equivocado.
And a lot of people hope it's me.
Mucha gente espera que sea yo.
Here's another author. These authors are fascinating because they try to explain away their own conscious experience, their own qualia. As the philosopher John Searle puts it, how could an intelligent person paint themselves into such a corner? They certainly give it a good try, but as well as being crazy, it's also, of course, dehumanizing. They end up saying that we are all some kind of deluded zombie or machine.
Otra crítica a Dennett, de Richard Sandland. Estos autores son fascinantes porque tratan de no explicar su propia experiencia consciente, sus propios qualia, sus propias propiedades cualitativas de los estímulos. Como dice el filósofo John Searle, ¿cómo podría una persona inteligente ponerse en ese lugar? Tratan de hacerlo, ciertamente, pero además de estar locos, es también una forma de deshumanizar. Finalmente terminan diciendo que somos todos algún tipo de zombie loco o algún tipo de máquina.
That's right. But we're very nice zombies. And we're natural zombies. The Cartesian theater, as I think you can see now, is a very appealing idea, even to some very wise thinkers. And here's my dear late friend Daniel Wegner in a wonderful book, The Illusion of Conscious Will. He says, we can't possibly know, let alone keep track of, the tremendous number of mechanical influences on our behavior because we inhabit an extraordinarily complicated machine.
La idea del teatro cartesiano sigue siendo muy interesante para algunos. Consideren, por ejemplo,
a un libro de su amigo Daniel Beckner, La ilusión de la ilusión de la conciencia, no podríamos saber ni siquiera seguir el tremendo número de influencias mecánicas en nuestro comportamiento, porque estamos habitados por una máquina extraordinariamente complicada. Perdón, habitamos, sí, perdón, gracias.
You see how close Dan Wegner's view is to the view that I've just described. He says the brain simplifies for us. Well, what's this us? It's not a Cartesian homunculus, it's itself. The brain is its own user illusion. One part of the brain creates a simplification for another part of the brain. And that's how it works.
Esto podría leerse como que el cerebro simplifica las cosas para nosotros, pero ¿qué es ese nosotros? Es el mismo cerebro. Una parte del cerebro simplifica para otra parte del cerebro y así es como funciona.
Now, so there does seem to be a Cartesian theater, and how could this be true? I want to turn to an uncontroversial example, complementary color affirmages, and now we're going to do a little experiment, which should work just fine in this room. And I want you just to follow directions so that everybody has the experience, because I think it will show you just how tempting the Cartesian theater is.
Un experimento va a mostrar cuán tentador es el teatro cartesiano. Sigan las instrucciones.
So I want you to stare at the white cross, the fixation cross, and not move your eyes. So just look at the cross, please.
Miren a la cruz en el medio y no muevan los ojos.
And don't move your eyes, and don't move your eyes, and now. What did you see?
¿Vieron?
Did it work? Did it work? Let's do it again, okay? So, don't move your eyes.
Miren la cruz en el medio, no muevan los ojos.
Sí. American flag.
Now, some of you might even be willing to say that the lowest short red stripe is intersecting the black cross. Let's do it one more time, and you'll see if the lowest short red stripe intersects the black cross.
Algunos pueden pensar que la banda roja de más abajo intersecta a la cruz negra. Fíjense si es así.
Yes? Okay, close enough. Now, the lowest short red stripe is intersecting the black cross. What are you, body? And where is There's no red stripe on the screen.
No hay ninguna banda roja en la
And there's no
pantalla
red stripe in your brain.
y tampoco en tu cerebro.
Well, where is it?
¿Dónde está?
It doesn't exist.
No existe.
Here's a page from an old textbook on vision, and it shows a cut through the brain. Here are the eyeballs. Here, there's the crossover, the lateral geniculate nucleus, if you want to know. And back here, on the back of your brain, in the occipital cortex, there is a pattern of excitation, and it's upside down and backwards and split and very distorted. And there's even, you see, red lips. The artist has put that on. That's a metaphor.
Esto está sacado de un libro de texto que representa un poco la vía de la visión a partir de la retina, el núcleo geniculado lateral, y en la corteza occipital, acá atrás en la nuca, se representa la imagen y en realidad lo que está representando el autor no es más que una metáfora.
Now, the red is represented in fact, in MT, no, in V4 and other areas of the brain, but it's represented, it isn't rendered as red, of course.
El rojo se representa en áreas de la corteza como B4, pero es representada, no hay un rojo ahí.
So now maybe we can see that Frisbee's image is metaphorical in the same way Steinberg's is. There aren't any colors in the brain. There aren't any legible words in black ink in the brain. Those are both metaphors.
No hay colores, no hay letras en negro en el cerebro, esas son todas metáforas.
There's no red stripe in your brain, there's a representation of a red stripe. And it isn't red.
Hay una representación de la banda roja y ni siquiera es roja.
There seems to you to be a red stripe. And the seeming isn't red either.
Nos parece que es una banda roja, pero ese parecer tampoco es rojo.
There is no red stripe anywhere. It just seems as if there is. And that's hard for people to accept. They want to reintroduce a red stripe somewhere. And you have to recognize that that is like the Stone Age fellow who wants there to be some little color somewhere in that video disc. No, there doesn't have to be.
Es difícil aceptar que no hay una banda roja y queremos introducirla en algún lado del cerebro, y esto es parecido a esa persona de la edad de piedra que miraba el DVD y quería que hubiera colores ahí adentro. No, no los hay.
Let's try another illusion, see if it works for you in this light. I don't know. If you look at the black, one of the black dots in the center of one of those, how many of you see something strange?
Que mirar alguno de los puntos negros en el centro y ver algo extraño.
If it works, maybe it's not a big enough image for any of you here. You should see rotating like gear wheels.
Tienen que girar las ruedas como si fueran
Do any
engranajes.
of you see illusory rotation? Just a few, all right. Well, you need a much bigger screen and maybe different lighting to get it well. If you see a good version of this, it's just overpowering in the sense that these are gears that are turning. And of course, the shapes seem to be rotating. And there are representations of rotation in the visual system, in NT, in fact, a particular region of the brain.
Cuando esta ilusión se hace más grande y con buena luz, las formas parecen estar rotando y hay representaciones de esa rotación en el sistema visual, pero no están rotando.
But they aren't rotating. They're just representing rotating. Are they really representing? Yes, they are. If these neural processes are representations, for whom are they representations? And how does there seem to be rotation to me?
Si estos procesos neurales son representaciones, ¿para quién están representando? ¿Y cómo puede ser que a mí me parezca que están rotando?
Here's a test of your intuitions. Suppose we make a humanoid robot with color vision, and it instantiates our best scientific model of color vision. So it exhibits complementary color after-image illusions like the American flag. It says, I seem to see a red stripe on the wall.
Imaginen que hacemos un robot humanoide con visión de color que tiene en sí lo mejor que sabemos, el mejor modelo científico de la visión de color. Por lo tanto, exhibe color complementario luego de las ilusiones de imagen como la de la bandera y dice, me parece que veo una banda roja en la pared.
Some of you may want to say, yeah, but that isn't real seeming. Well, yes or no?
¿Pero esto es de verdad algo que parece o no?
Remember, our imagined robot instantiates all that we know about human color vision, including effects on emotions, effects on attention, effects on attitude, heart rate, you name it. If that isn't real seeming, then you're holding out for real magic.
Este robot tiene todo lo que sabemos sobre visión, incluyendo otras cuestiones fisiológicas. Por lo tanto, si esto no es verdaderamente que le parece algo, estamos hablando de magia.
So my conjecture is that anybody who thinks there's a heart problem is making a naive error about consciousness, like the Stone Age error about the video disc.
Cualquiera que piensa que hay un problema difícil es haciendo el error ingenuo análogo al de la persona de la edad de piedra sobre la conciencia.
If you're inclined to say this, there can't seem to me to be a red stripe unless there is some stripe representation rendered in subjective red, in the red quality. If you think that has to be true, you're falling for the Stone Age failure.
no puede parecerme que haya una verdadera, que haya una banda roja, a menos que haya una representación de esa banda representada en un rojo subjetivo, que lo llamaríamos el qualia, la cualidad de rojo, y ahí estamos haciendo el error de la edad de piedra.
You're saying there must be qualia in there causing our appreciation, our beliefs, our behaviors. Let's see. It's relatively easy to make a computer program that can identify and recognize blue capital A's without rendering them.
Relativamente sencillo hacer un programa de computadora que puede identificar o reconocer la letra A azul sin representarla.
Your brain can do it too.
El cerebro también puede hacerlo.
So your intuition that you couldn't seem to see a red stripe unless a red stripe were rendered somewhere is mistaken.
La intuición de que no podría parecernos ver una banda roja, a menos que fuera representada una banda roja en algún lado, es errónea.
Now, what are the functions of these neural representations, if not to direct a rendering, a second transduction?
¿Cuál es la función de esta representación neural si no fuera representarse una segunda transducción?
Their functions are many, but to see what they are, we have to look beyond conscious experience and ask the hard question, and then what happens?
Tenemos que mirar más allá de la experiencia consciente y preguntar la pregunta difícil. ¿Y entonces qué?
So to end with something non-obvious, there seems to be a second transduction because we're taken in by our own user illusion.
Parece haber una segunda transducción porque estamos engañados por nuestra propia ilusión del usuario.
How did our user illusion evolve? That's a long story, and my forthcoming book will tell you all about it. It's called From Bacteria to Bach and Back, The Evolution of Minds.
Esto lo va a contar en su próximo libro, es una larga historia, y el libro se va a llamar De las bacterias a Bach y vuelta, la evolución de las mentes.
I'm sorry. Okay, I have too many slides here. That's good. Thank you for your attention.
Tenemos tiempo para algunas preguntas, si es concretas mejor y no en largos testimonios. Vamos a ir Tristán y yo por los costados, bueno, o Beatriz y luego
Hi, you're one of my heroes. And I heard recently an interview with Harris and Chalmers, and I thought, I think well of Harris. I thought he would show him what's what. He didn't. He actually, Harris looks up to Chalmers. I was flabbergasted by that. They said a lot of nonsense, and I wonder how is it that professional thinkers they do this for a living? How can they be so wrong? It's like they never heard you talk. I listen to you and it makes perfect sense. They don't make any sense. How? I don't understand.
haciendo referencia a una charla entre Harris y Chalmers y le sorprende cómo algunos pensadores pueden estar tan equivocados, que es parte de lo que decía de su charla.
I've known both Sam Harris and David Chalmers since they were students, and they're both very smart. And Chalmers, they both know a lot of neuroscience. They both know a lot of cognitive science. They're both very smart, but they're not as smart as I think they are.
Los conoce a los dos desde hace mucho, de estudiantes, los dos saben mucho de neurociencia, piensan que son muy inteligentes, pero no tanto como piensan.
That's very rude of me to say, and I apologize to both of them. Let me put a more positive spin on it. David Chalmers trusts his intuitions to an astonishing degree. And I've argued with him about this, Today I hit upon a formulation of his argument, which seems to me to be pretty much what he says. One, intuition tells us that philosophical zombies are possible in principle. And philosophical zombies cannot be told from conscious people by any objective test. But here comes the important second premise. He knows he is not a zombie. Therefore, we need a revolution in physics. That is trusting your intuition more than I think that he should. I once arguing with him, I've spent hours talking to him about this, and he said, Dan, don't bother with your arguments. I know your arguments, they're very good, they're very persuasive, but you can't change my intuition. And I said, okay, David, I'll take your word for it. Have you considered a change in diet?
Dice que Chalmers confía demasiado en sus intuiciones, y una forma de presentar sus argumentos es: pueden existir zombies filosóficos y no podemos distinguirlos de una persona real, pero Chalmers sabe que él no es un zombie, por lo tanto tiene que introducir el argumento de que debe haber una revolución en la física, debe haber nuevas leyes naturales. Es una de las formas en las cuales Chalmers presenta el problema del problema difícil. Y entonces cuando discuten, Chalmers le dice: conozco tus argumentos, Dan, está todo bien, pero no vas a cambiar mis intuiciones. A lo cual Dan le contesta: bueno, pero pensaste en cambiar de dieta.
Oh, and let me add something else too. David Chalmers is a very persuasive speaker and a very smart guy. And it wouldn't surprise me at all if you came back here tomorrow and let David Chalmers tell you his side of the story. You might well walk out of here thinking he was right.
Y David Chalmers es muy inteligente y muy persuasivo conferencista, así que no me sorprendería que él viniera a dar una charla mañana y ustedes terminaran pensando que él es el que tiene razón.
Chalmers prometió venir el año que viene.
You should all come and hear him. See what you think.
Hi, Dan. I actually have two questions. First, I wanted to know how to cut the woman in half. I wanted to know how to cut the woman in half, but I think I have to wait. And then the other question is, and then what? Actually, the hard question, because even if we are on your side, it's still like looking at DVD and thinking, well, and how does this make an image?
Good. Well, I'm not going to tell you how to saw a woman in half, although I could, because I have many friends who are magicians, and we're not supposed to do that. And I like to keep secrets about things about magic, but not about consciousness. Now the hard question: where does it go, and why? How could it ever satisfy us? I take it that's your question. The answer to the hard question goes on and on and on. You have to remember that. I think people forget that. I mean, it covers all your emotional reactions to color. Let's just take my color robot that sees the red stripe. If he really has the whole global workspace theory instantiated, then just as you have your favorite colors and colors you don't like and color combinations you don't like, so does it. Just as you can be reminded of an event in your youth by some color combination that you see, so can it. The set of downstream effects from any conscious experience is huge. And once you start taking them seriously, and trying to answer them, you realize that you can start eliminating the bafflement of the theory. What the trouble is that so many theorists, they work only on, as it were, the upward path. At the conference here a few days ago, Michael Graziano had a diagram that he calls this arrow A and arrow B. Arrow A goes from the brain up to consciousness. Arrow B comes from consciousness back to the brain. And he points out correctly, most theories put all their attention into going up, getting to consciousness, and then they stop. Ta-da! They declare victory. Except they also declare mystery, because until you have addressed the question of, and then what happens, and how does that account for what we think is so wonderful about consciousness, you haven't really, you've only got half a theory there. And, or less than half a theory. So I'm working to get the neuroscientific community to work on downward arrow B, work on the sequelae, what follows afterwards, the consequences of various conscious states. And it's not just that you can report them and hinge your policy on them and remember them and discuss them with your friends and reflect on them in your own mind. You can do all of that. Once you start making a catalog of all of the things you can do once you're conscious of something, you begin to realize that consciousness is pretty wonderful and useful and not so mysterious.
Muy breve resumen de la última parte que viene después. La mayoría de la gente que trabaja en esto sigue el camino hacia arriba, o sea, desde el cerebro hacia la conciencia. Y aquí en el congreso que hubo hace unos días se habló también del camino inverso, desde la conciencia hacia el cerebro, cómo podemos tener reportabilidad, cómo podemos hablar sobre la conciencia, todas las cosas maravillosas que vienen después. Y eso es lo que él piensa que los neurocientíficos tienen que estar pensando de ahora en adelante.
Sí, lo voy a decir en español, no sé si me podrás traducir. ¿Dónde está el límite? ¿O dónde está la diferenciación entre esta concepción de la conciencia desde un individuo a lo que se forma socialmente, como especie?
That's a good question. And I am one of those who agrees with Nietzsche and Marx that consciousness is very much, human consciousness is very much a social phenomenon and cannot be explained without appeal to looking at the conditions for social interaction.
Estoy muy de acuerdo con Nietzsche y con Marx, que dicen que la conciencia es un fenómeno social que no se puede explicar sin tener en cuenta las interacciones sociales.
In fact, in my new book, one of the main arguments in the book is that much more of our consciousness than we might think is something that we learn to do by being socialized, by learning language in particular, but not just that. And that if you want to imagine a human infant somehow raised asocially on a desert island without any parents and without any peers, that child would not only be profoundly cognitively disabled, but really would not have the kind of consciousness that we have. Would not be able to reflect, would not be able to think ahead, would not be able to daydream. All sorts of things that we do really depend on the practice we get growing up in a society.
en su nuevo libro habla bastante sobre el hecho de que la conciencia se va desarrollando gracias a las interacciones sociales, en particular el lenguaje, pero no solo el lenguaje, y propone imaginarse un chico que crece en una isla desierta sin ningún tipo de interacción. No solamente va a tener problemas cognitivos, sino también va a tener una conciencia muy diferente a la que nosotros conocemos, no va a ser capaz de reflexionar, no va a ser capaz de imaginar durante el día, va a ser una conciencia diferente.
It seems to me that if you are going to defend the thesis that consciousness involves, in some sense or another, a trick or a bunch of tricks, and that I can interpret you in basically two different ways. One is that you are basically denying all the conscious experience, for example, like the churchmen do. And another is to say, well, you are not denying it, but you are denying that it is like we ordinarily conceive of it. So, I think you are defending the second. I think the second interpretation is correct. If it's not, I ask for you to correct me on that. But if you defend the first, like for example the church ones do, it would just seem to me that you are changing the subject. You can speak all the day about the brain, but if you don't say a word about consciousness, it's just like you are not solving the problem. It's just leaving it aside. But if you, as I think you are, if I interpret you in the second way, my question would be the following. For example, I am seeing a blue screen right now. You may well argue that deceiving is not something real, that it doesn't seem to me to be something blue, but it seems to me to be something blue, or that it seems that there is something blue. But at some point you will have to stop, and on that point there will be I think there will be a real seeing. And how to explain that last seeing? Because the brain is of course finite.
Okay. You want to try to put that in Spanish? Okay. But let me see if I can give a short response. Philosophy involves those issues where there's a war of intuitions between different people, and very often when you try to adjudicate and clarify and explain, you're faced with a choice, as you suggest and as I have said many times, between saying two different things which look very different. One is X doesn't exist at all, it's just an illusion, or saying, yes, X exists, it just isn't what you think it is. It's something very different. And both answers, in fact, it can be that there's almost no difference factually between the two responses. It's a question of diplomacy. And in Consciousness Explained and in my work on free will, I have said in both cases, yes, there's free will, yes, there's consciousness, but it's remarkable how different it is from what the folk think it is. That's what consciousness is, that's what free will is, but you have to give up some of your pet intuitions about those phenomena. But some people don't want to give up their intuitions. For them, I say, well, if that's what you think consciousness is, then yeah, it doesn't exist at all. If that's what you think free will is, if you think it's real magic, no. Then I'm saying that doesn't exist. And notice there's no contradiction there. It's just depending on whether the audience in question refuses to countenance the idea that they might be wrong about some of the key features of the phenomenon at issue. Now, I think there's plenty of real seeming in the world, because after all, we, all of us, take tremendous risks every day on the basis of how things seem to us. That's real seeming, as real as it gets. And sometimes we find ourselves in very difficult exchange, and we may look back and say, well, it seemed like a good idea at the time. That's real seeming.
Muchas veces en filosofía uno se enfrenta a problemas que tienen una dicotomía, o esto no existe, o bien existe pero es completamente diferente a como lo pensamos, y que requiere un cierto grado de diplomacia o estar entre ambas, y lo que él dice es que las personas que opinan que no existe la conciencia o el libre albedrío, en realidad él le responde desde sus libros como que sí existe, pero es completamente diferente de cómo lo piensan. Y lo que decía hace un rato, que no les gusta porque eso sería abandonar completamente sus intuiciones. Por supuesto, sí existe que nos parezcan cosas, pero a veces ese parecer es completamente diferente a como lo pensamos. Por ejemplo, ahora me parece algo diferente a como era hace un tiempo.
I have one question. Why does the consciousness exist, given that nature tends to be a little conservative in evolutionary terms? Why create such a thing if there's no need for it?
Why does consciousness exist? From an evolutionary point of view. My answer is actually surprising to many. Since I think that human consciousness is very much a cultural construction, some of the main ingredients of human consciousness are what Dawkins calls means. And they have their own fitness. And they exist for their own benefit. Cui bono, they are the beneficiaries. So I say the same thing about human consciousness that I say about religion. When I was writing my book on religion, Breaking the Spell, an evolutionary account of religion as a natural phenomenon, I found lots of people who said, well, religion is as an evolved phenomenon. Good. So, what do you think religion's good for? It must be good for something, because every human group that's ever been studied has some kind of religion. To which my answer was, every human group that's ever been studied has the common cold. What's it good for? It's good for itself. It's a virus that can spread because it can't. It's a parasitic symbiont. And I think many aspects of religion are the same way. Some of it does a lot of good, but some of it doesn't. The reason it persists is not just because it does good. It persists because it's been well designed by cultural evolution to exist, whether it does good or not. And I think the same thing is true of consciousness. I think that there's even a case to be made that human consciousness is a bit of a trap, that we're stuck in an evolutionary limb where it's not any longer good for our genetic fitness. It's mainly good for its own fitness. And here's a thought to mull. I ask my students about their education and why they're coming to the university to get an education. And I asked them, do you think that's fitness enhancing in the genetic biological sense? And if they say yes, I said, oh no, in fact it isn't. If you look at the statistics, if, say, eating broccoli had the same depressing effect on genetic fitness that having a university education, they'd have to put a warning label on broccoli. Caution, eating broccoli will very likely minimize your genetic fitness. Why? Because people who get an education don't have as many children, and that's what fitness is all about. So I ask my students if they care that they are threatening their genetic fitness by getting an education. No. Nor should they. Because one of the things that we have learned, thanks to culture, is that there are things that are more important to us than having more offspring than our neighbors. And human consciousness is, I think, without human consciousness, we couldn't adopt that perspective. And is it good for us? Not from a genetic point of view, it isn't, but from the perspective that it enables us to have, it is good for us.
¿Para qué existe la conciencia? La conciencia también es una construcción cultural y en ese sentido la asemeja un poco a la noción de memes de Richard Dawkins, que uno podría preguntarse qué valor adaptativo tienen los memes. Y no tienen ningún valor adaptativo para el individuo, sino para sí mismos, se reproducen a sí mismos. En ese sentido también recuerdo lo que escribió para el libro sobre la religión, en la cual él muestra que la religión es un fenómeno natural, entonces vienen las preguntas de entonces ¿para qué sirve? Y ahí usa una analogía de preguntar, así como casi toda la gente tiene religión, casi toda la gente tiene un resfrío. ¿Y para qué sirve un resfrío? Para nada, salvo para los virus que se reproducen a través del resfrío. Y por último contó una pregunta que le hace a sus alumnos de si piensan que es adaptativo en el sentido genético, en el sentido evolutivo para ellos, estudiar en la universidad, y todos le decían que sí. Sin embargo, él puede demostrar que no, porque al igual que comer brócoli, el tener un grado universitario no es bueno adaptativamente, dado que disminuye las posibilidades de tener hijos. Los que tienen educación tienen menos hijos que los que no tienen educación superior. Sin embargo, lo que hay que considerar es que evolutivamente no solamente tener hijos debe ser considerado una ventaja, y para eso también sirve la conciencia.
Yes, hi. Speaking about illusions and also with impressions and all that, I obviously sitting here in my chair, I have the feeling that the homunculus is there. I feel the homunculus sitting in his chair. The chair is more or less here between my eyes, so I feel it. The self is there. And probably the same happens to everyone in this room, and probably to you as well. But it doesn't have to be always like that. So there are brain states, for example meditation, or brain states that can be achieved by the intake of substances collectively known as psychedelic drugs that can dissipate that can dissipate the delusion and can somehow, for some transient period of time, leave you, that okay, the Cartesian theater is not real because I don't feel it anymore. So my question has two parts. First, obviously, if you believe that the fact that these manipulations can dissolve this illusion is proof that this is actually an illusion because it can be dissipated. And second, if you think that these are useful tools or are things that people can go through as a philosophical experience, so almost like as philosophical tools to convince themselves. Maybe they read your book and they are not convinced that the Cartesian theater exists, but maybe they go through one of these altered states of consciousness and they are convinced. So if you think these are essentially useful things for philosophy. Sí, lo que yo le pregunté a Dan es que, bueno, que obviamente todos en esta habitación sentimos que el homúnculo, que nosotros estamos en nuestra cabeza, estamos en algún lugar probablemente entre los ojos, nos sentimos que tenemos un yo, que el yo está ahí adentro, que Dan seguramente también lo siente y que parece casi algo inevitable, pero que no tiene por qué ser inevitable, o sea que la meditación o el consumo de ciertas sustancias que se conocen coloquialmente como psicodélicos a veces resulta en un estado en el cual ese yo se disuelve, se pierde. Entonces la pregunta que yo le hice a Dan es primero si el hecho de que ese yo se pueda disolver es evidencia de que ese yo es un poco una ilusión, o sea que el teatro cartesiano se puede derrumbar al tomar ciertas sustancias, prueba de que justamente si el teatro cartesiano no existe. Y la segunda parte de la pregunta que yo le hice es si él considera que este tipo de experiencias son educacionales, son herramientas filosóficas de alguna manera, porque pueden llevar a una persona que quizás leyó el libro de él y no quedó convencido de que el teatro cartesiano o que el yo o que ese homúnculo es una ilusión, no quedó convencido de leer el libro y quizás después va y medita o consume cierta sustancia y sí queda convencido. Entonces, si realmente son herramientas útiles.
My first teaching job was in Southern California at Irvine during the 60s.
Mi primer trabajo fue en California en los 60s.
And I was scarcely older than my students. And many of them urged me to join them on all sorts of trips. Mezcal, LSD, you name it.
Yo tenía muy pocos años más que mis estudiantes y ellos me invitaban a acompañarlos en viajes psicodélicos con mescalina, LSD, cualquiera de ellos.
And aside from some marijuana, and I did inhale, I resisted. And I was glad that I did, because at least for those drugs that were available, I watched some very bright students turn into raisin brains and really damage themselves permanently. And so I've always been myself very conservative about this. I appreciate that what they were sure of is at least a real possibility, namely that altered states of consciousness can be sources of insight. My own experience, however, with people who are either in altered states or have been in altered states a lot is that I would just as soon not find myself in the state that they consider insight. So I'm fairly square on this matter, but I have friends who are they're not urging me any longer to take drugs, but they're working on it themselves in various ways and discovering fascinating things. I'm very interested in the work that they do, and your suggestion that it might make possible variations in cognitive architecture, in how the global neuronal workspace manifests itself at the personal level. I think that's a very plausible idea, but I'm going to approach it very cautiously.
Que si bien él tuvo experiencia con marihuana, no tuvo experiencia con otras drogas psicodélicas, no se arrepiente porque vio a algunos de sus estudiantes terminar muy mal por esto. Por tanto, no tiene experiencia directa, aunque ha visto reportes de gente que bajo estos efectos manifiesta tener lo que en inglés se llama insight, o bien apreciación, iluminación, como ver las cosas de otra perspectiva, que, insiste, él no es ducho en esto, pero colegas de él están trabajando, y la propuesta que hacían en la pregunta de que bajo ciertas sustancias este espacio neuronal global puede ser modificado, por lo tanto eso modificaría la noción de conciencia, es muy interesante y le interesa saber cómo va a seguir la investigación con él. Habiendo hablado de drogas, creo que es un buen momento para parar. Estamos en el Ministerio de Ciencia de la Nación, pero realmente tenemos que parar, nos pasamos bastante. Pero antes de saludar a Dan, les cuento, sigue el mes del cerebro. El miércoles va a estar Rodrigo Quian Quiroga hablando de los recuerdos, que está sentado por ahí. El jueves presenta su libro sobre el cerebro Facundo Manes aquí, y la semana que viene hay otras actividades, incluyendo una actividad sobre drogas psicodélicas justamente, que va a ser una charla que va a dar uno de nuestros investigadores más importantes en el área de motivación, que es Marcelo Rubinstein, que estaba por aquí pero ahora se tuvo que ir. Así que fíjense por favor en www.cciencia.gov.ar, nuestra programación del mes y lo que sigue. Muchas gracias por venir y muchísimas gracias a